Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Clockwork Game Dev Show. My name is Keith Burgun. I am your host. I am today talking about execution and strategy games, as per this here fancy chart. Refer to my chart and it will be clear. We'll be talking about execution today. We have an article from Bob. Let me pull that up, actually. Where did it go? Execution. Oh, it's in the Clockwork Game Dev Show. Where'd it go? 1 second here. There it is. Yeah. So apparently I read this back in the day, but I I don't remember it. So this is one of the things we're going to talk about today is this article by Bob, aka Blubberquark. Also, you may notice that I've been experimenting with the format of the show, the visual, how it's all laid out. I'm trying to look at other streamers and see what they're doing, and I think this might be better. Yeah. Guess I should put headphones on too. There we go. That should improve the audio a little bit. So I'll wait for some people to show up. While I do that, maybe I'll implement really quick my Gem Wizards Tactics art. So we've been having some pretty good chats in the Discord today. Some conversations about Magic the Gathering. If you're not familiar with the Keith Burgun keyboard Discord, you can visit it by going to keithburgun.net. There's a link for chat at the top. Check that out. And come on by. But yeah, we have a Magic the Gathering fan in there. And trying so hard to defend Magic against just an onslaught. Like everybody is against him. And I appreciate his gusto. But I don't think he's correct. I think that, I think my opinions on Magic the Gathering are pretty well known. Been talking a lot about CCGs recently. And I will say this. Every other CCG I've ever played, maybe that's not true. Almost every other CCG that I've played was better than Magic the Gathering, I would say. Overall, pound for pound. All right. So let's actually real quick bring this over here so we can drag in arrow animation. So I'm just going to do some quick game dev before people show up. And once we have people here, say hi and we'll start the conversation about first execution, I guess, and then number of players in games. Hi, the crouch mode. How's it going? Let me just implement this really fast. I'll be quick. Arrow animation. Where did it just go? I definitely just dragged this in, but it just disappeared on me. Here it is. Oh wait, did I drag it in twice? No, I did not. I think 32. This doesn't matter. Points. No, blah, blah. Okay. Now this is a multiple. Sprite editor. Hey, Bob, how's it going? So we're going to go through your article. How many frames we got? 9? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah. Rows 9. Bottom left. Slice. Whoa, I did the wrong thing. Oh yeah, no, columns. Okay. There we go. Cool, we got that. And now let's try to drag it on in there. Make an animation. This would be in UI, I think. Okay. Cool. Now we want to make this into a prefab. I guess this could go in here. Yeah. Cool. I'm so excited to have this arrow animation in there. Alright, that's good enough for now. Let's just push that. So we can get to some game design as planned. Save this. So how's everybody doing? Are you all keeping indoors and quarantining? How's your quarantine going? If you're like me, quarantine doesn't change much. Because I was quarantining before it was cool. I admit that. Alright, so let's do this here. Boop, bop, bip. Okay, so we want to talk about execution. It's hard to just jump into it without having something to jump off of. We talked about in the chat. I mean, my classic claim is that execution is a form of randomness, and you know, I think that's true. I don't think it's the same as drawing cards, but I also think I don't think drawing cards is the same as rolling a die, and I don't think rolling a die is the same as generating a random number on a computer. I think all forms of sort of unpredictable, I guess you could call it, you know, methods for getting unpredictable numbers or outcomes are have their own qualities. Execution has its own nuances and particularities. But yeah, let's read this article. This is apparently from a couple of years ago. But I don't think the theory has, you know, moved much since then. Execution, this is by Bob, aka Blubberquark, aka RFG Pfeiffer in the Twitch chat. Alright, execution skill is a resource and bidding mechanic. Prerequisites, Keith Burgun's video on execution skill. This is a link to my Clockwork 3-minute game design video. So people may have already seen that, but that would be something to look at. And now this, Dario Wunsch, advice for StarCraft players with less than perfect execution skill. I don't know about this. Try to treat StarCraft like a sandbox. Ugh, that's a bad idea. I mean, there are so many ways to play this game. You can find your own niche or style. I'm assuming that this player is very good at this game. Like, because that may start becoming true once you're like at pro levels and you're playing against just whoever. You can just start sort of fucking around. I think that becomes more true. But if you're just a normal player, the average typical player, and you're playing on the ladder, I don't think that's really true. I think, but we'll see. I mean, I don't want to read two whole articles here. But conclusion. Let's just read the conclusion of this one. If the game mechanics are too easy, there will be less space for innovation and amazing comebacks. So this is a classic claim. It's also related to the claim that without like high randomness, that you can't have variety or surprise. I think that just by using certain principles in game design, emergent complexity, I think that you can actually allow for there to be innovation and amazing comebacks without difficult game mechanics. And I think that they mean game mechanics in the sense of like clicking really fast, APM and that sort of thing, not game mechanics in terms of like mechanisms. Few cookie cutter build orders will dominate. Players will have to follow a mainstream metagame. Yeah, see, like that's the whole thing, is like people just don't believe that these systems can be actually deep. And like, to be fair, StarCraft isn't. If StarCraft didn't have execution and all that stuff, it really wouldn't work. So yeah, I think we need to like design systems holistically that can can meet these criteria without having, and I think that's possible, and I don't think that this writer thinks that's possible. I think a lot of people don't think it's possible because they haven't really seen it. There aren't a lot of good examples of it. But anyway, I think that's probably to this sort of a side point to this here. Main thesis, execution skill has an important function in many strategy games. Well, yeah, of course, if it's in a strategy game, I mean, you can't just take something out, right? Like, beyond merely keeping the outcome of the game uncertain because somebody could still fumble the execution. Yeah, I agree. Again, you can't just take execution out of an existing game. So take StarCraft or take I don't know what else, some fighting game that's more strategy game-ish, or in many strategy games. I'm trying to think what other strategy games have execution in them. Like a MOBA or something. Of course, execution, you can't just take it out. The game is built around it. So, but that's probably not what Bob means. Execution skill informs and influences tactical and strategic decisions. Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of like how so do dice rolls, right? Like if you know you have a 75% chance to succeed on a certain roll, you may factor that into your strategy and be like, okay, well, I have only a 10% chance to win this, to do this other thing that's strategically better, but I have a lower chance to do it, so I'm going to do this thing that's like strategically okay, and I have a pretty solid chance of doing it. In this regard, execution skill is analogous to locally good play in Go and short-term tactical skill in board games. Well, execution skill is always super small arcs. So we were talking about arcs in the last some of the last shows. Execution skill is always at the smallest. It's always like the smallest arc level, super tactical stuff. Like in fact, it's almost like the definition of execution is that it's part of the definition of it is that it's interacting with the smallest arcs. You know, so like something like literally like moving a Marine like a little tiny bit over so that when Baneling comes and explodes, it doesn't hit that Marine, or things like that, like little, really, really micro in the literal sense interactions. So yes, it is similar to. I mean, I would say it's even more tactical than locally good play and Go. But yes, it's extremely tactical. I'm currently working on Bullet Blueprint, a tactics game with real-time controls, but no way to mess up your execution. That's good. This is an interesting topic for discussion. No way to mess up your execution at what point? Because I mean, you know, technically speaking, you can mess up execution in a turn-based game. I've done it a million times in Oro. You know, particularly turn-based games where when you take action, you have there's some kind of hidden information revealed, so you can't just like undo, which you know should usually be the case in a lot of turn-based strategy games. Okay, what is execution skill? Execution skill in games usually based on dexterity and fast reaction. So I like the word reaction is, I think, useful. I think we'll come back to that. In contrast to high-level decision-making, execution skill is the ability to pull off a complex strategy in real time and follow through on your decisions. I also think, and I don't know if this is going to be mentioned here, but a lot of my complaints about execution is that they're just what your body does when confronted with things. So like in fighting games, that's the best example of that. Like, when someone comes at you to jump kick or whatever, you kind of just do something without thinking. You react, and it's sort of like muscle memory. And there is a meta sort of like managing your patterns that happens, but in terms of like moment to moment, it's like your body's just going to do what it's going to do, kind of, because it's trained to do a certain thing. Execution skill comes in last. After you formulate a plan and commit to it, you need to execute on the plan. If a game does not fit into this schema and you cannot group your actions into plans, you cannot disentangle the slow, high-level decision-making from the fast and frequent actions that make up the execution of the plan. Disentangle the Let me just reread that and parse that. You cannot group your actions into plans, and you cannot disentangle the slow, high-level decision-making from the fast and frequent actions that make up the execution of the plan. Yeah, so I think this is just talking about how, like, large arcs are made up of smaller arcs, right? Pretty much. Zoom in a bit. Yeah, can do. By the way, I think I can increase my resolution on. How's the resolution on my stream? If someone can tell me, can you read like the text, the chat text in top right? Let me know how that looks, or if it's that too small. Execution skill usually relies on fast System 1 muscle memory. Arguably a part of System 1, definitely not inside your muscles. High level decision making utilizes the much slower System 2. I think we've talked a little bit about the System 1, System 2 stuff a bit here before. Micromanagement or twitch skill are often used synonymously to execution skill in many games. Right. In other games, macromanagement also benefits from fast execution, so this is not always a one-to-one correspondence. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the worst things about something like StarCraft is that, like, your ability to be quickly clicking around and doing a lot of micro, and also be making your, production decisions and stuff like that. Like it's all happening in that super fast tactical layer. I think that's what makes it so stressful to play. Skills and time scales in StarCraft. Some games require both execution skill and high level thinking. Pardon me. StarCraft, for example, contains fast-paced execution, tactical decisions, and long-term strategy. On the long-term strategic level, you have to think about pressure, build orders, and expansions. Hey, Dark, how's it going? Map control, timings, and unit compositions. On the intermediate tactical level, you can decide whether to harass, attack, counterattack, or defend. You must regularly gather intelligence/map vision, adjust your army position, divide your army regularly, build pylons so you don't run out of supply. On the fast execution level, you must split your Marines or directly against area of effect attack, concentrate fire on the most... I like that he used the same example that I used moments ago. Today's discussion is about execution in strategy games first, and then we want to talk about number of players in strategy games. So like multiplayer games, like 3-player games, co-op games, team games, all that kind of stuff. Concentrate fire on the most important, most vulnerable enemy units, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, this I can't stand that they added this to StarCraft 2. Regularly spawning chrono boost. They added just like another button that you have to press every 30 seconds. I really hate that. Although, to be fair to Blizzard, I think actually what StarCraft is that this actually... So I always had a vision of StarCraft and Warcraft as something other than what it is. I always envisioned it as like a strategy game where, like, okay, yeah, there is execution, but it's not really about that. It's really about, like, coming up with cool plans and countering and creative decision making and stuff like that. And, like, it's actually reverse. Like, it's mostly an execution-y, sort of thing. And there's, like, occasionally a little bit of the other thing. And so I think actually this is the right decision. And in fact, maybe they could even add more of this kind of stuff, and that might be the right way to go. Just really embrace that it's this, like, it's like a fighting game, basically. Tactical and execution skill in games overview. All right, so far it's just been talking a lot about StarCraft. Turn-based strategy games, Frozen Synapse, Advance Wars, have tactical and strategic elements but do not rely on twitch execution skill. Tactical decisions allow you to gain or lose a material advantage, but they also have medium-term repercussions on unit positioning. Fighting games need some tactical decisions as well as a lot of execution skill. Some games have mini-games that rely on execution skill. This is weird to bring this in because I feel like, in like something like Mass Effect, like you could just do anything. Like I remember in Final Fantasy VII at one point there was just an RTS in the middle of the game, and it's like, yeah, sure, that's fine. It's RPGs are kind of they're not strategy games. I mean, I guess maybe that's an issue here, is that this isn't talking about just in strategy games. This is just saying execution in sort of a broad sense. And execution in a broad sense, I have no problem with it. I think execution in contests is great. I think, Guitar Hero, rhythm games, like those are really good, clear uses of execution, and I have nothing bad to say about that. It's specifically in the case of strategy games that I have an issue with it. The hint book and Machinarium, shoot 'em up minigame, sure, why not? The isolated use of execution skill is deliberate by putting the solution behind a skill. Check, you still feel a bit accomplished when you open the hint book. Sure, I agree. It can make you feel accomplished when you do the thing. I played that game, I played Anodyne 2 the other day, and it had like these little, before you would go into like a level, you would have to do this little, very simple rhythm game thing. And like some of those things are just about like giving you something to press, something to make inputs with, so that you feel like you're sort of interacting with this thing. Bob says, it's an interesting problematic design decision to add execution in mini games to an otherwise not execution heavy game. Is it? Because I don't disagree. I mean, like if we're talking about like Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VII is not an execution heavy game. They could add a they did add an RTS to the game. There's a racing sequence. Seems fine to me. I don't have any problem with that. What's I don't see what the problem would be with adding just about anything to those systems. I guess they added execution for Final Fantasy VIII, and I know some of the new ones are real time, and I don't know how execution-y they are. I assume that they're not very execution-y, but probably more execution-y, with various time bonus damage mechanics in combat. Oh, is it like the Super Mario RPG style or Paper Mario style, where like you like press the button at the right time and you get the crit? That's one of those things that like if I thought RPGs were strategy games, I'd object to that. But like anything goes, really. You could shoot the gun sword by pressing R1 just as you hit. Yeah, that's from Super Mario RPG. Super Mario RPG was the first time I saw that system used. Maybe someone could correct me that that's been used before Super Mario RPG. But then I think it was even more popularized by Paper Mario. But yeah, I mean, honestly, like I'm totally into that. That's fine. And like, give me something to do while the RPG is happening. Absolutely. That's great. Rhythm games like Quadrant or Bit Trip Runner rely on twitch skill for the most part. Yes, there are few to no decisions you can make along ahead of time. Real-time strategy games like the game StarCraft have many layers: strategic, tactical, execution, and metagame. Success or failure on every layer feeds back into the higher level decision making, while higher level decisions inform the lower strategies you must follow. Sorry, I got the yawns today. Is yawning a sign of coronavirus? Someone look that up for me. No, I'm just kidding. It's not. 13 is more like you control overall team strategy while the characters mostly attack on their own in real time. Okay. That's fine. I mean, yeah, it's all fine. When it comes to like RPGs, I mean, you can mess it up. You can make there are systems that, are objectionable in an RPG. But like you kind of gotta really mess up for it to be like a problem. Okay. Yeah. I should be clear also in terms of RPGs, like that's just for like the combat system. I think overall RPGs are difficult to make and difficult to balance and all that kind of stuff. Not similar to how strategy games are difficult to balance, but okay. So anyway, I think overall the take I'm getting from this article is that so far is that it's just sort of trying to say that execution is just small arcs, is just very small arcs, and I don't think that that's I don't think that's wrong, but I think it's like missing part of the thing. But we'll see if we get into it. Board games. We're gonna skip this part here. Role-playing games. Let's just let's go to the next section. Decisions between skill and reward. If you can choose between a plan that requires a higher amount of execution skill and a plan that requires just a little execution skill, you choose the more difficult path if it only leads to a reward that is commensurate to the risk and only if the reward could change the outcome of the game. Like, that's what I was kind of saying before. Like, yeah. And you can swap out, instead of execution skill, like, you could actually, while you're playing, like, let's say there's some, like, really hard shot to make, and then there's, like, an easier shot to make, and the hard shot to make is worth, like, 10 points, and the easier shot to make is worth, like, 4 points or something. And you can sort of do a little quick rough math and be like, okay, I think I have, like, I don't know, like, yeah, like a 10% chance of hitting this 10-pointer, and I have, like, a 80% chance, or 90% chance of hitting this 4-pointer. Like, I'm pretty darn sure I can get this 4-pointer. And so whether that's RNG, like whether that's like literally a 2-hit percentage, as in like D&D, or whether that's execution skill, it's less numeric when it's execution skill. It's more just like, I feel that I can do this shot, but it's ultimately the same thing, which is my big message here, which is just that execution is a form of randomness, and yes, you can strategize around randomness. But that doesn't mean it's not randomness. Strategic decisions in board games and turn-based games relate to tactical skills in a similar manner. You should only decide to start with a risky invasion and go. Right, of course. And risk, and these kinds of like risk reward, questions, that's not a problem. That's part of all strategy games, like kind of all the time. My issue is just that when it's based on a random number generation, and because it severs the sort of the sequence of meaning that's being built throughout the match. So players, I talked about in my episode, 3-minute game design episode on meaning. I don't know if anyone watched that one, but it was talking about how, as you are placing moves, like let's talk about Go really quick. Every time you place down a stone, you're like imbuing the game state with meaning, because that you placed that there for a reason. You had an idea, you had a plan. All of that stuff is meaning that's being built into the system. And then when something just random happens, that sort of like line of causality is like severed at that point. And it's kind of like, oh, and then, by the way, just some other thing happened. It's kind of like if I'm telling you a story and it's like this. I think actually Trey Parker gave a talk one time about storytelling where he talked about how it's like, I forget the words he used, but it was something like this, which led to blank, which led to blank, which led to blank. So it was talking about like this sort of deterministic or meaning, charged list of events that happen in a story. Whereas the opposite of that is something like, then like on the other on the other side of the world, meanwhile back at the ranch, therefore, but yeah, like some of these different words kind of sequence into each other more or less, etc. Also, check out this really great shirt. I don't know if I've shown off this shirt on this stream yet before, but it's really good. Just says hello. It's got Hello Kitty. I got this in Little Tokyo in LA one time. That's my story. Games can include certain... Oh yeah, they had a Hello Kitty store, and it was really good. Games can include certain moves that require a twitch skill for very little benefit. These options are red herrings. You do not take them if you're serious about winning. Well, I mean, that sounds bad. Why are you putting red herrings into the game? If you are low in health in a fighting game, it may make sense to reposition yourself for a risky attack or try a move that is easy to mess up. As long as you can maintain your advantage, there's no need to resort to risky strategies. Once you start to execute a reflex-heavy or look-ahead intensive plan, such as an invasion and go or early Reaper harassment in StarCraft, you cannot back down without realizing your losses. Yeah, I like a lot of this is not directly engaging with the topic as I see it or think about it. Execution skill factors. Hold on. When you are an advanced beginner at StarCraft or Go, you don't lose to better players because your invasion fails or because your Reaper dies, and your investment was for nothing. You probably know how good or bad you are at execution skill or life and death problems. Thus, never attempt a plan that's outside your capabilities. I don't know if that's true. I can say for me in League of Legends, I absolutely attempt things that are outside of my capabilities, my execution capabilities all the time. Execution skill, one of my favorite characters with which to attempt plans that are outside of my capabilities. I don't know if you know the character Talia, but Talia, she's like a jungler or a mid laner, and she can create this giant wall that just like cuts the map in like, like at level 3, it's like, it cuts the map like in half almost. And she makes this huge wall and she can ride on it. So the idea is like a team fight's happening somewhere or something, some shit's going on, and you want to send this wall up in such a way that it divides everyone up in a way that's like super advantageous to you. And then you also can ride in on the wall and land there on either side of the wall. And then like, the idea is like you broke everyone up in an advantageous way, and then you come in and you start kicking everyone's ass. And I do that move a lot, and it never works out. It's kind of funny. If I take an action, I found an error. If you take an action, any action in a game, it signals to the opponent that you think this action is the most important thing that you thought you needed to do. If you place a stone and go, it tells your opponent that you think this move is the one that gets you the most points. Okay. If you commit to a micro-intensive plan, your opponent might conclude that you think you have the skills to pull it off. Depending on the kind of game and your strategy, a perfect response to your plan might require an equal amount of execution skill. Your opponent might decide to go for a difficult defense in response to your attack, or play a safer strategy, which fares better in the worst case, but it's not the best possible response. Oh, you fixed it. Look at that. Wow. The future is here. So, I also want to just say as like a general thing, a lot of times when we talk about like ideas like execution, randomness, and things like that, anything that's in the game, whether it's like a good thing to have in the game or not, players can and will and should play around it, right? So I think there's like a distinction maybe between like, well, what should you do as a player if you want to win? And what should we value in terms of like, we're going to design next year's games or games 10 years from now. What should we try to do? If we're like, and I think that a lot of times like we're sort of stuck thinking about the games that exist now. And so it's like, well, StarCraft needs execution, right? And I agree it does. But maybe the games that we make in the future won't need execution. We can certainly make games that don't need execution. But yes, in StarCraft, I think it has all these sort of like functionalities. This is all correct. If you commit to a micro-intensive plan, we already read this. Of course, if you're a beginner playing against another beginner, you can usually just attack and see what sticks because you're likely to mess up your execution of the attack as your opponent is to mess up the execution of the defense. Sometimes this is the best way to learn. In this regard, an attack in Go or StarCraft is like bidding or betting. You initiate an attack and bet a large amount of resources on your plan. Well, that's true in any game, right? Any strategy game. It's all you could say because you're investing some resource into a given strategy. And so you're, in a sense, it's a bidding or betting thing. That has nothing to do with execution. Your opponent can then decide whether to meet you in a contest of execution skill or concede a larger amount of resources for certain. Reflexes, attention, and APM as resources. I agree that they're resources, and my biggest complaint is that something like APM, what's that software that Steven talks about? He mentions it in the chat sometimes. It's like a software where you just drill, like aiming, clicking on objects on screen. Another example is in League of Legends. There's Kovacs, yeah. In League of Legends, you can just go into the practice tool and just practice last hitting, and you probably should do that. So that's one of my biggest issues with execution is that yes, it's its own little like bar, it's its own resource, but you bring it into the game. It's kind of like to me, it's like if we were gonna play StarCraft together, and like because you, I don't know, made better financial decisions than me in your life, you're gonna start with like 200 more gold or something like that. That's what the execution. It feels very separate from the rest of the game. Like there's everything in the game, and then there's this like executional mini game. Now in the case of StarCraft, it's so execution-y. Everything is so execution based that it's all that it's kind of all execution. I think that practicing is nice, but the best way to practice, I think that the best practice you should be able to have in any game is by playing the game. And I think that that's one of the problems with execution is that it makes you go and drill shit like Kovacs or shit like Practice Tool or worse. Practice just drilling build orders in StarCraft. I remember that used to be a thing where you would just like literally, I had a friend who was trying to become a pro StarCraft player, and he would set up a stopwatch and just time himself doing this stupid build order, and he'd just do that over and over and over all day. I think that kind of stuff, maybe to some extent that's unavoidable, that sort of thing. Like I guess, chess and Go have things like openings that pro players try to memorize and things like that. My game design philosophy is minimize that stuff as much as you can. And part of that is going to be minimizing execution. Why is what the crouch mode asks, why is it a problem? Why is what a problem? Yeah, no, they are fixable, and I'm just saying, let's fix them. I agree. Yeah, Chess 960 is an example. There's a few other examples. That's good. That's reflective of what I think we should do. If we're talking about strategy games only, it's obviously a problem. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Don't you see the title here? Execution in strategy games. Lead me down a primrose path. That's the word of the month, the phrase of the month. I'm using that a lot. Primrose path. It's pretty good shit. Practicing something specific rather than practicing by playing the game. Right. Yeah, because the game should be a holistic machine, and the best way to practice it should be to play the whole thing. So one of the problems is like that atomization of execution separate from the rest of the game. But yes, also the randomness. It's output randomness, which hasn't really been addressed here yet. Why do we need to design contests when speedrunning exists, TBH? I mean, not many people do design contests. Contests are also not very hard to design usually. It's, a lot of times, like if you think about like folk contests, like pie eating contests or things like that. Guess the number of things in the jar contests. Those are perfectly functional. They get the job done. They do it. Execution is not separate. That's why I wrote this post. I think that so I'm trying to figure out your argument. Your argument is because execution. So I know that execution interacts with small arcs, but I don't think it is the small arcs. Execution is like the input method with which you interact with the small arcs. It's not the same as the small arcs. And that's why I do think it's a separate thing. And I mean, again, you can grind APM. You can grind aiming in an FPS separate from the game. I also happen to not be a huge fan of watching speedruns. I don't quite get the speedrun thing. Like, I know it's like a phenomenon. Everyone's watching those. And I've watched them a couple times. I'm like, oh, that's cool. I need to watch one every 4 years probably, and I'm good. Let's see. So let me start a thingy here. What's this? Oh, this is the last week's thing. Okay. Let's make a new one. Execution. My issues with execution in strategy games. It is output randomness. Same as a dice roll combat or anything like that. In some ways, it's even worse than dice roll combat because it's kind of like because players can grind it outside the game and then basically be playing D&D with weighted dice. Whereas typically dice roll combat is, you know, is like 2 hit percentages are determined entirely by, you know, let's put XCOM in here or something, just because D&D is a little weird example. I agree with you 100%, mostly 100%. However, execution might be an important part to competitive real-time strategy games. Well, yeah, no, it is. It's one of the first things I said. To StarCraft and games that are StarCraft likes, yes, execution is necessary. You can't just rip it out, right? Yeah. So absolutely, yeah. That's crucially important that they're there for the existing games. A lot of my theory is just for like, what are we gonna do next year for games? What are we gonna do for 10 years from now? That's really what I'm concerned with. Do we want to just keep making things that are like StarCraft? If so, you got the model. You don't need game design theory at all. Just do it. You know, make some little tweaks here and there, experiment, whatever. I think that a lot of my project is about like trying to figure out how we could do something theoretically maybe much better than what we've done in the past. You know, no one knows if that's possible or not, but that's the premise. Dice roll combat to hit are determined entirely by, you know, systemic rules inside the current match. I know that's a little weird with D&D. I don't know what another example of a dice roll. Oh, you know, let's use like what's that card game? Summoner Wars. There you go. I mean, I know Magic and Hearthstone have random 2-hit things as well. Okay, what do I have? I think, well, like dice rolls, it is atomized from the greater system. You can kind of add an execution challenge to any interaction. You could add an execution challenge to any interaction. See, this is where this gets complicated too, because like in the case of StarCraft, note, in the case of StarCraft, everything is so, you know, intrinsically tied to execution. There's almost nothing that isn't directly affected by execution. That this statement might seem wrong in that context. Like, so like what my where I would lean is that like I would almost want to say that like StarCraft is an execution contest with like sort of like a strategy game veneer to it. Is it output randomness if it's highly predictable? Yes. 99% rolls are still output randomness. The only way you can have it be not output randomness is if it's 100%. Then it's not random, or 0%. Or you can make it be input randomness by having it be any percentage, but have it be like that there's some time for the player to respond to what happens as a result. We've talked before about input and output randomness. Yeah, so I think I need to explain this a bit more. But isn't decision making itself a form of execution? Is it fundamentally different in some way? Well, I would rather answer that in a different way, because decision making is a little bit weird. Let's just say so. Let's answer that here. Let's say strategy, right? Strategy versus execution. So another way of forming your question isn't strategy itself, how are strategy and execution distinct? So strategy is let me try to think here. I'm just trying to process your question in the best way possible. Isn't decision making itself a form of execution? Yeah, sure. Both take up thinking, time, attention. Just about any activity that a human could do would do that. But not all activities are strategic. So, isn't decision making itself a form of execution? So, like, I guess we haven't defined execution. That's probably the best way to do this. What is execution? By definition, execution is different from execution. You mean from strategy? Yeah, I tend to think execution is, so we're definitely using execution and all this kind of stuff. Like, there's many definitions for any given word. And we're trying to use the ones that will help us get the best distinctions for the kinds of things we want. So, yeah, the way that Bob laid it out was you make these decisions and then you can see if you can execute them. And that's one form of execution. I just want to indicate, I don't mean execution in the sense of, of actualizing your plan. Because this happens in all games, in all strategy games, regardless of the, of whether they're real time, etc. Right? So I don't mean, okay, in Go, I have my strategy is I want to take the top left corner, and then to execute that, I'm going to start placing stones up in that top left corner. That's not what I mean by execution. What I mean by execution is input, fast, difficult, error-prone inputs that interact, especially with the smallest arcs in the game. And I think execution is there. This form of execution is literally there to create variance because of human input error. Example, Street Fighter, like really clear example. Street Fighter to Dragon Punch input. Notably, they actually put in the original Hand-eye coordination is part of it. I'm just gonna put some key terms, or like related terms. Hand-eye coordination is one of them. Reflexes is definitely one of them. Reactions. APM. Let's put these in a comma list instead. Something like, stuff like that. Notably, the Street Fighter 2 inputs, those complicated, like, you know, forward, quarter circle, punch, those kind of things, actually, not only are they designed so that you mess them up sometimes, but also, I forget the details of this. Somebody probably knows this, but, like, there's some frame thing with those where, like, they actually made it that, like, every 5th frame or something, if you make an input, it just, like, ignores it or something like that. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's not just that the input's hard to do, but they actually made it, like, hard. Everyone will fail it sometimes because of some, like, frame data thing. The execution of this is actually part of the balance of the move. So, like, they make this move very strong, but they make it that you have to make this complicated input in order to pull it off. I think maybe Zangief's super, or not his super, but like one of Zangief's throws is like that. I remember he had like this like pretty crazy, like you had to do like full circle or like forward, full circle back, forwards, full circle back, something like that. Like you had to do something really crazy. And that they balance around those inputs being hard. So that's what I mean by execution. Hopefully people are clear about that. I do not mean the first sense of execution. Yeah. Okay, cool. So now, how is this different from decision making? Well, here's a really good way that I've put it in the past. Decisions, strategy, address questions of should I do this or that? Execution is a question of can I do this or that, right? So like and yeah, something that's interesting to me is thing that isn't really done ever. Execution converted from output randomness to input randomness. ARMS? Like the game ARMS to me looked like someone's attempt. I never played ARMS. That's a Switch game. But ARMS looked a little bit to me like it was someone's attempt to convert output randomness execution from output randomness to input randomness because you know the inputs are you know, and you messing them up or you doing these little like fuck ups, that's random. But with ARMS, as I understand it, you have these two characters, and I don't think, from what I've watched some gameplay videos, and I don't think they fully were like aware of this, they were doing this, so I don't think they really embraced it, but I could imagine a version of ARMS or a game like ARMS where characters must stay 10 feet away from each other. Let's call it like Keith's version of ARMS. Two characters must stay at least, you know, like, I don't know, 10 feet, let's say longer, 20 feet away from each other. They have really long, stretchy arms that slowly fly across the screen at each other, or projectiles. Point is, after making an input, it takes, I don't know, 2 to 3 seconds at least for your input to reach your move to reach the opponent. Now, you still have output randomness a little bit. Still have output randomness on defense, I think. Because, like, something's coming in and you are doing whatever you're doing and you could still, like, oh shit, I accidentally hit into the thing that's coming in. But anyway, this is just a thought experiment kind of thing to illustrate how you could possibly move away from output randomness and maybe convert, because like you know, like I say, execution is a form of randomness, and thus can be well, actually there's another problem. Execution cannot be made into uniform randomness. It's not going to be uniform, really. And players, again, will always be able to bring in that grinded stuff. So it sounds like you dislike small-scale dexterity-dependent interactions specifically, not all tests of player skill. Well, I think it's bad for strategy games if small-scale dexterity-dependent interactions... Well, dexterity-dependent interactions, that I think that actually is what I'm talking about here. Let's actually write that as part of our thing. Let's add that here. Dexterity-dependent. That's the definition of execution. That's like part of the definition. So yes, it's not so much that I dislike it. In fact, actually, most of my life I've played first-person shooters, real-time strategy games. I still play League of Legends all the time. It's not a matter of my personal tastes, really. It's more a matter of, like, theoretically, how do we embrace what strategy games, this machine that we understand about strategy, like, you know, machines, contests of decision-making, how do we best embrace that form? And so it's not about whether I like it or not. Yeah, my personal reaction when playing a execution game is I guess mixed. I mean, there are some things I definitely don't like about it, but that's not the main thing that I'm trying to talk about here. Players will be able to bring their own, grinded out training into the system. Players will, sometimes a player will just roll bad the whole game. Right? Like, so we've all had that happen in execution strategy games where it's like, I just keep fucking up this game. I should keep rolling zeros or rolling ones on my execution. And it's like, if you keep rolling enough ones on that execution, you're just going to kind of lose, regardless of how good your strategy is. I'm always rolling bad the whole game due to general mal-coordination. Yeah, and... well, in that case, that may be a uniform randomness thing, I guess, perhaps, that you have a sort of uniform, but most people have good days and bad days, good games and bad games in terms of that. And I guess you could say that about strategy too, but like that's, I think it's different. I think because of the atomized nature of execution. So I'm about ready to move on to the next topic, but I'd like to give you guys a few minutes to ask some questions or give me some thoughts if you have any. Okay, so our next topic. So I don't think the last part is relevant. What's the last part? Oh, last part of your article. I'm sorry. My bad. Let's finish this article. That you can economize APM. The map is much bigger than your screen, and unlike action games or RPGs, important things can happen everywhere on the map while you are not looking. You need to be aware of the state of the whole map, your own position, your allies, and your enemies. While you're pushing a lane, concentrating on last hitting, focus firing, or splitting your marines against banelings, you have less time and attention to build your base, defending against counterattacks, etc., etc., etc. Yeah, so I don't deny that, like, in StarCraft, there's this attention economy thing. I think actually that's pretty fundamental to what StarCraft is. Faster you are the execution, the more time you can free up to do more things. Right, so you're bringing in this extra resource. It's kind of like if I start with 300 gold and you start with 100 gold. That's one of my complaints. A common pitfall for new StarCraft players is to focus too much of their time and attention on your main army and not enough on building your base and scouting the map. If you learn to play faster, you can switch focus to and from your base and economy more often, but especially if you're slow, your attention should be distributed economically in the first place. As the conventional wisdom in StarCraft goes, a player with bad execution skill but sound priorities and a high level of strategy will beat a player with a high APM and bad economy. I don't know if this is true. I think it's kind of hard to prove also. I think this is the fantasy. This is the dream. Like, this is what I remember I spent, 20 years playing these games. And this is sort of what I really, believed in. And I think it's conventional wisdom because, I think it's part of the story of StarCraft, the narrative of StarCraft, right? Like, I don't think people want the opposite to be the case. But from my understanding, it's difficult for me to actually believe that this is true. And it's also very hard for us to get a hard answer on this. I don't know how we would exactly... I mean, I guess, yeah, high APM, maybe. High APM is not always the best metric to determine whether someone is good at execution, right? Like, someone may click more and have worse execution than someone who clicks less and actually has better execution because they're just making more efficient clicks each time. Let's see. Let me finish this and then I'll check up on the chat. TLDR, do not just think about contests of execution skill deciding the outcome of a game. Think about how execution skill or a lack thereof influences high-level decisions. Okay. Let's see here. You don't think the last thing you can economize APM? Most strategy games and all good strategy games are turn-based anyway, so I don't even see the point of arguing about this. Well, because not everyone agrees with you and I on that fact. But yes, if everyone was like you and me, Marcus, then we wouldn't have to be having this discussion. Sadly, that's not the case. Only because real-time strategy games right now suck as strategy games. Also true. Not because real-time is fundamentally worse. Yeah, I over the years I've definitely come around on the idea that that real time could be made. You could make a real time strategy game, and I'm using that not in the genre sense, but in the literal sort of sense. A strategy game that is real time that mitigates all of the problems with real time enough that it's basically equivalent to turn-based. So I don't think, I guess maybe I disagree with Marcus that it's a fundamental quality, that real-time is fundamentally worse. I do think it's a matter of the way we make real-time games is just terrible. We have no consideration for execution. We're StarCraft and these games are kind of the way that they were designed and thought about, I think, is as much influenced by something like a movie like Starship Troopers as they are, any kind of game design theory or, trying to avoid certain pitfalls in strategy game design. I don't think they're very systemically designed games. Like if you look at like Euro games, you know, designer board games. I don't think StarCraft and those RTSs, I think they're largely, they're almost like folk games. And so I think that, you know, MOBAs are only like one step removed from that. So I think that it's too early to say that real time is fundamentally worse. I think right now, in the case of all of our existing examples, it's definitely much worse. But I do think that you could make a real time game that that smartly navigates those the issues with real time. But I also don't blame someone for being skeptical about that. But we'll see how it goes. Spam clicking to keep your APM up. Yeah, that's the thing. Multiplayer turn-based strategy games usually have their time turns, so they turn into RTS basically. I don't think time turns are that doesn't make it an RTS in my opinion. I mean, Hearthstone is not real time, and Hearthstone has a timer, so I think I definitely reject that opinion in terms of like if you have a timer, then it's a yeah. I don't agree with that. Next page. Everything is real time because the world is real time. Checkmate. What was my other topic I wanted to talk about? Oh yeah, number of players in games. All right, so here first, I'm going to just start this off with some bold claims. Let's get us started with some bold claims. All right, some bold claims. One player is the ideal number of players in a strategy game. 2-player, competitive is the least flawed existing alternative to 1-player. Let's make these claim number 1. Number 2. So you guys can refer to these if you want. Number 3. Multiplayer free-for-all is fundamentally bad. Let's just say like has some extremely like what's a good way to put it? Is what's the way I can put this? Like is bad. Let's just say bad. Okay, there we go. And we'll clarify that more for team games / co-op games are basically 1-player are basically 2-player head. Let's word this better. Team games are 2-player competitive games, and co-op games are 1-player games. But in both cases, the player is split up into a the player's control is divided among a number of players. Think like a 3-legged race. So like overall, make 1-player games, or if you must, 2-player games. Other than that, like anything else is not a good starting place for a serious strategy game, but may be great for party games, social games, etc. So those are my bold claims. 0-player games, I don't know what that is. I'm doing the thing where I'm taking your troll comments seriously right now. Yeah. This is my face when I take your troll comment seriously. Pretty serious. I don't know. Scary, actually. So it's a logical consequence. Must be true. The fewer players you have, the better. Pretty much. Yeah, and so let's talk about why that is. Actually, I'm going to quote you. Here, machine. The fewer players you have, the better. Why is this? Because this is because other players are highly variable sources of randomness. For you, the player of the game. Does that make sense? Like, in general, it's good if game designers can control the randomness, distributions, I guess you could say, directly, rather than having extremely messy and unpredictable humans act as your RNG. You can fix the highly variable part by A, not having hidden information, B, having an MMR system. Let's see. Not having hidden information? No, that's not true. Because, like, chess doesn't have hidden information, and players can still do, like, wonk-ass weird shit sometimes. Just because they're people, you know? It's better. I'm not a chess fan, and I don't want to play chess against a human or a bot, but chess against a bot is better. Chess needs the wonk-ass shit, weird shit to work. Well, that's another thing that I will say. That's a good point. So, and if anyone has ever just tried to, and the reason this applies to our one-player strategy jam, one-player games are very hard to make. And really what you're seeing there is that strategy games are hard to make, and that two-player, let's see, how do I put this? Like, when you introduce a second player into a game, game design suddenly becomes a lot easier because players sort of do some of your work for you. Players I'm trying to figure out a good way to put this. Chess needs the wonk-ass weird shit to work, right? Introduce basically just like weird random outcomes, surprise, by way of their human weird eccentricities. I didn't spell that right. Eccentricities, there we go. A game like chess, which is otherwise very simple, 8x8 grid, all you can do is move pieces, capture, needs that wonk ass weird shit to seem interesting. What about one versus many? Well, that's team game, right? That would fall under team games. So that's just a two-player game, and one of the many is, I'll add that here. One versus many is a two-player game where one player is broken up into a team. So the same issue. Then it wouldn't be a strategy game. The main aesthetic For many it would be social. Yeah, so like that's the thing too, is like if somebody told me they were making a strategy-ish kind of thing, but it was like kind of like this party D&D thing. What was that game? Descent is an example of one versus many, I think. And that's not even a good social game. It's just terrible. But I could definitely see someone making a good like social game where you have one player versus many, and many, like that's the thing about like social games, party games. A lot more you can get away with, and you can kind of do anything. It's a little bit like the RPG thing. If you don't have weird outcomes, the games just get played out really quickly. Yeah, that's right. And you don't need to write a story when the game creates a safe, limited version of interpersonal drama. I'm not sure I follow like what that's connected to. You may need to like retype that or like add the context to that. Why is that better than competing against an opponent? Oh, I should also mention I have another issue with two-player competitive. Let's actually add this as claim number 5. On a social level, multiplayer competitive games have a hierarchical, who's better than who dynamic, which is at least arguably fertile ground for bad feelings and possibly train people to think about human beings in more hierarchical ways. I.e., super competitive gamers also getting super into IQ or something. That's the first example that comes to mind. I should actually add hierarchical or objectified, quantified ways. So to flesh that last one out a little bit, it's true that acknowledging certain people are better at certain stuff is not inherently toxic. But the ways that strategy games are like these close, like, tight little universes where some things are really just better than other things within that universe. And so that's one of the things is who gave the talk about that? Let's see if I can find it. I think it was Naomi Clark. Clark, systems, thinking, something like that. Yeah. Or wait, no, this is not it. Oh, this is, she came on my podcast and talked about this. So this is one thing. Oh, did I mix up? Oh, I did. Wait, what's IE? The fuck is IE? Now I'm confused. Oh, these are like Latin terms, right? My bad. Thank you for saving my ass there. Okay, it wasn't this, but this is, I do recommend listening to this. This was good. Oh wait, maybe there's a link to this though. Maybe. God, it was at like GDC, I think. I think it was anyway. I don't think this is it. No, this is not it. No. Here we go. Found it. The last talk in the clip.
Changed people's lives. In short, I'm not before going to see Marvel
interactive, right? They're interlocking a lot.
So this is a really good talk. That I don't want to. We can get into this in a second because I don't want to get too like distracted. Because I've made a lot of claims and I don't want to just go directly into the sort of social human aspect of it before we get through the other stuff. And there was a lot of other chats that I missed. So let's go back to those. I disagree that team games are two-player games. Teammates add randomness to your team. Well, in League, you can have perfect time to get Dragon, but your jungler refuses to come. Right, yeah, but you can certainly imagine a two-player game where you have like 5 units, right? Like League of Legends could have theoretically been a game where you had 5 heroes and you're controlling them all at once with this crazy StarCraft APM clusterfuck, right? That certainly could be the case. As you say, could be the perfect time to get Dragon, but your jungler refuses to come. How is that good? Like, that's terrible. In terms of for a strategy game, that's one of those things where the human, like, just eccentricities that that to me doesn't make the game better. That's actually like dreadfully bad for the strategy game. But I think that there is something, there's something kind of like cool from like a social perspective that like, oh, we're all like doing this hive mind thing and like together we're barely communicating, but we're sort of like figuring out, like doing our own strategy that's kind of merging together. I think there's like a social aspect that's kind of cool about that, but that's distinct from the values of strategy games. You know what it's like? It's like Twitch plays. It's like, you ever see the Twitch plays thing where like they take some Mario or something like that and they're like in the chat, people are doing whatever they do to like influence what the thing does or the player does. So yeah, it's like Twitch plays. That is, oh, okay, cool. Wait, so how was I wrong then to use IE there? I don't know. I think I wasn't terribly wrong to use IE there. But I do agree. EG sounds more right, but IE doesn't sound wrong to me, even knowing the translation. Every time someone says in media res instead of in media's res, you can't say in media's res. That's too many S's. I can't say S's like at all because I have a little bit of a lisp, so it's like takes a lot of effort for me to say S. Really tough thing about one-player strategy games is like coming up with any system that's more variable, surprising, or generally interesting than a human brain is a tall order. Right, I agree. It is a tall order. I like that quote. I'm gonna copy paste that. Boom. It is. It is a tall order. I think it'll become less and less of a tall order as we learn more about how to make strategy games. What else we got? I'd argue that one player versus computer is never going to be as fun or satisfying. Well, that's. I mean, I think you're right there, but there's like another level to that. Let me copy paste that one. Oh, I like that it like when I paste it in, it like looks like that. That's kind of cool. It's like a cool format. We can like respond to the chats like this. If anyone objects to me putting their chat in like this, just let me know. I'd argue that one player versus computer is never going to be as fun as or satisfying. I want to highlight the word satisfying here. I've long noticed that that in like an FPS or something, shooting a person who's like there's an actual human being there and I shot them and they fall to the ground and now they can't move anymore is so much more satisfying than doing that to a bot. And I think there's like a lot going on in there. Like, why is it so satisfying? And nice. Good job. Use the Twitch points. I think some amount of that satisfaction is coming from basically a bad place. A feeling of dominating another human being, of being better than someone, superior. Superior to someone. Because competition is fun. That's one of the big reasons we play games. That doesn't have a lot of explanatory power. You know what I mean? Like, sure, I agree. I've spent most of my life playing competitive games. I agree competition is fun in this like broad sense. I think what I'm arguing here is that some of that fun is coming out of like sometimes it's fun to do things that are bad. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm saying that there may be a bad thing in there that's causing some of that fun. There may be a socially, like an antisocial thing that may be causing some of that fun. I don't think it's about domination because it's still more satisfying to lose against another human brain than against a computer. It's more going up against than about domination. Well, does anyone agree that the domination thing is like a factor there at all when you do win? That even if you lose while you played, you had that potential for domination, and that's like part of the well, I think all game design, everything we do is going out into the world, right? So everything's social engineering. And it's just a matter of like what direction you're engineering in, right? Because like things are right now, everything is social engineering in a direction. Everything is, if we assume that art and games and media has any ability to socially engineer at all, it's doing it already, and it's doing it in a certain direction. It's like pushing things in a certain direction. And so I'm just asking like maybe if we want to challenge the direction that the current social engineering is actually going. And losing partially sucks because that feeling of getting beaten for much the same reason. Yes, I agree. And that affects different people differently. I mean, we all have known someone who, like, when they lose at a competitive game, it just seems like their whole fucking world has melted down. I've known people who... I knew one guy who we were playing Smash Brothers together. He lost. He got up. He picked the Smash Brothers cartridge out of the N64, opened a sliding glass door, and just hucked his cartridge deep into the forest. And then everybody spent like the night out in the woods looking for it. So that was one thing. I also knew a different guy who just like after he lost one time, he just like screamed into a pillow and then just like collapsed. And just stayed like collapsed, not moving, with his face in the pillow for like 45 minutes. And then of course, like, look online gaming, League of Legends, things like that. It's pretty well documented the amount that people are clearly feeling bad things. I think that Marcus, the Crouch Mode, plays a lot of tabletop games. I think that in a social setting where it's like you're playing with people it's different, and it's a lot harder to enter in so fully into that, like, I'm better than you domination-y kind of mode when you're just playing, like, chess with your friend or your family member. But I still think that it's still there a little bit. I don't know. It's a problem with the players, not the game. Yeah, maybe. Although we could say that take these same players and have them play a one-player game. And by the way, this one-player game is still competitive in the sense that you can win or lose, right? One-player strategy game where you can win or lose. So it still has a lot of what we like about competitive games. And you take those same players and they win or lose. And I suspect that a lot of those dynamics won't be there anymore. Maybe some of them still will. I can definitely see some, yeah, you're right, that some probably will still tilt. But I feel pretty strongly that the presence of another player who has beaten me changes the dynamics a lot. Like, there have been a lot of social experiments done about, like, it's like, would you rather, I forget the details, maybe somebody can tell me the name of this study or this experiment that was done, but it was like, and it highlights something that I think we all kind of know, of this thing of like either you can be, you can like be super poor, but everyone else is even poorer than you, or you can be like middle class and everybody is middle class. And like something like that, where people were like, I just want the thing where I'm better than the other people. Like there is this quality, and I don't know where it's coming out of, but I think that may be a factor sometimes in these strategy games, multiplayer strategy games. But yeah, you're right. I think players may still tilt to some extent. I predict there would be massively less tilt in a one-player strategy game than in two-player. I also think there's different kinds of tilt. Like it's interesting how in team games, like people will tilt at their teammates. I even see that in groups of friends sometimes, which is really interesting. I think it's different. Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about that last thing, that Maltese Falcon. Maltese Falcon. I know what that is. That's from Star Wars. I guessed it. Lacking the social humiliation aspect is pretty key. Yeah. People are more or less sensitive to that, though. So I want to talk about what Maltese Falcon here said. It does create that effect in a good way, creating an engaging experience players get immersed in. Dan? I don't know what Dan means. Is that your name? Dan? I can't remember two names for everybody. If you want your name to be Dan, go into your Twitch settings and change your name to Dan. So anyways, what's it called? Okay. So I want to respond to this last thing. Your name, nice to meet you, Dan. But I am going to probably call you Maltese Falcon because I'm not going to remember. It's I can't remember the associations with everybody's name. Except for the crouch mode, because he's always here, and Twitch doesn't let you change name? What? That's wacky. Come on, Twitch. They're adding all these stupid features and you can't even change your name. Like, they should do a thing like Discord does where you can, like, fake change your name just for this channel. Like, you guys should have a Keith Burgun Twitch channel name. Anyway, so what I was going to say. Yes, creating an engaging experience that players get immersed in. So this is my thing. If you go to my website, see, look, in bold and italics. My brand is strategy games that you can live in, right? So I care very much about this thing that you said. That's super important to me. One thing I will say, you can change capitalization. The crouch mode. Sorry you can't change name, y'all. I'll try to call you Dan. If I can remember to, but I may also just call you Maltese Falcon. Yes, all games are social and exist at least partially in the social sphere. One-player games. Can be, I'm trying to think of like the right way to say this. I think one-player games may need a little extra support in facilitating that's the surrounding social interaction. So things like forums, chat rooms, ways to interact. I mean, like, probably you don't want to do things like, Dark Souls-y type things where there's like, resources being traded between players. I guess probably a bad idea for single-player strategy games. No, it's definitely a bad idea. But something where, like, ability to take screenshots really easily or save, like, GIFs or to do replays. ability to save replays, save and share replays, etc. Those kind of things I think help a lot for one-player games. Streaming is a big deal. I think actually, I think Oro actually, it's too bad that that Oro, like, streaming was already a thing when Oro came out, but like it was not quite as much of a thing as it is now. And I sort of wonder if like if it could have been like a pretty good game for streaming. Because it's kind of fun to like ask the community like, oh, what should I do, you know, or to kind of like, I don't know, share stories about. So let's write this like all strategy games sort of create these little stories which, you know, are really like the ways that we learn and become better players. Like add card collection, deck building, instant community, boom. Well, that is something I will say is like I think that Oro had the issue of being too atomized, and there was like not enough stuff to talk about. Things that I think like you know, componential complexity, asymmetry, etc. are good ways to give people like narrative hooks that they can refer to in forum Discord conversations. Oro, as a counter example, lacked much in the way of these features. Lacked these features. We could just say that. And that probably hurt its ability to exist in the social realm. But yeah. And another point. Multiplayer games, strategy games, serious strategy games aren't all that social while you're playing them. I think that a lot of people think like, oh, well, I'm going to play this like super serious strategy game with like 2 or 3 or 4 players. And it's like social time. And like a lot of times it's not. You know, I think back to, I was really into the game Puerto Rico. And when we would play that game, it was not very social. Like we really would just sit there and be staring at the board and thinking about the game. Strategy games are very, you know, involving. And it's hard to, you know, socialize really while you're playing them. Party games or social games are obviously not this way. Much better at that. Best socializing stuff is obviously the cool party games like Balderdash and so on. Well, right, exactly, yeah. That's exactly what I'm saying. Like the actual party games or social games, those are great. You are socializing during those. But yeah, serious strategy games, whether they're 1 player or whether they're 2 player, so number of players of a serious strategy game doesn't really change the basic the sort of like fundamental amount of socialness. Has a lot between the games, yeah, but I mean you could have that in 1 player too, right? I guess the idea is like you're not going to really play a 1 player game around a bunch of other people. Perhaps something to think about. Multiplayer solitaire which is what we sometimes sometimes Euro games get referred to as, where you have a competitive game, but really they're all like these solitaire games, and we're like just barely interacting with each other. Multiplayer, one player. Let's call it like, synchronized one player games. So what if we could all play a one player game together? All play this one player game together. Not in the co-op sense, where it's one match by committee. Let's actually reword this. We're each playing our own game, stopping at certain points or something. I think there's been some of this kind of stuff. Didn't Knock Fisher recently write a little bit about this, about the, what were they called? I forget what it's called now. But there's some people experimenting with things like this. DCCS tournament stuff is like that. Yeah. Tournaments are some good structures for that. Sounds like the worst of Euro games made even worse. Well, in a way, if you think that's really bad, it's like, yeah, we're going even further in that direction. But I don't think it's bad. It's like, think of a good one player game, and it's just we're all gonna sit around and play this good one player game. Like, how is that bad? But I do think it's good to think about ways that you can maybe make that or put into a tournament structure, etc. Ways that you can like bring that into a social level. I think to me that's much better than some typical Euro where we're all playing this one player game, but then suddenly, oh, what the hell? The wood just disappeared. I was playing Agricola and I had this whole little plan, and all of a sudden the wood disappeared randomly because another player chose to, because he's got his own little thing. I'm going to go look at 5 other players' massive Agricola boards, and like, it's ridiculous. So yeah, I think that's an improvement, is to focus just making them really good one player games. And then think about how we can play one player games together. And part of that's online, and hey, this maybe ties into the Corona quarantine. We all are by ourselves, and let's play some one player games that are good and share those stories with each other. Part of that can be things like streaming. Actually, streaming is maybe just a great way to, right now I think, a little while ago, No More Birds was playing Nioh, Nioh. It's like a third-person action game. Granted, it's not a strategy game, but it's whatever. It's a one-player game, and he can stream that, and people can watch him, and that's a good way to make one-player games social. I think that's a lot better than the multiplayer solitaire method. I think, where we're actually forcing other players to interact in this thing and having this like stupid score that's like, it's very dumb. The score comparison thing. Yeah. So anyway, this is what I got for today. Talked about execution. Talked about some bold claims on, let me title this. Bold claims on, let's just do that like this. Whoops. So I'm going to wrap up pretty soon. Unless people have any more thoughts. Let's take a look at our schedule. Tomorrow we will be playing a couple of community games. We're going to play some A Vibrant Melody. And we're going to play some Lux Ducks, which is by one of our new community members. And that should be cool. And yeah, in the future, I want to have Richard Terrell on. I think we've talked a little bit about that. That's a plan that I have. I hope one-player strategy, Hair Machine says, I hope one-player strategy games get developed and improve because finding direct competition a painfully intense form of interaction. That's true. I like the decision-making in the systems. Exactly. Yeah, me too. I also like, it's cool like when you can just play as much of a game as you want and you don't have to rely on, necessarily other players whims, right? Other players may not want to play another match of your favorite game, and one player means you can do as many of that as you want. In the meantime, playing against bots is pretty good too, because bots just go super fast, and you can kind of treat it like a one-player game. That's sort of what I do. I do a lot of that with Race for the Galaxy, which is one of the best mobile games that you can play on your phone, and one of the best games ever made, in my opinion. And Puzzle Strike on the computer, which is also one of the best games I think I've ever played. And yeah, I just play against bots in both of them, and the bots aren't good, really. Actually, the bot in Race for the Galaxy is quite good. In Puzzle Strike, it's not good at all, but it doesn't really matter. Yeah. It'd be nice to have systems designed for 1P. Yeah, I agree. Bots have a lot of downsides. No more birds! You're here just in time for me to leave. No more birds. Probably because the simulated human is missing a lot of the interest that's supposed to come with the other player. Yeah, no, that's true. And here's what we talked about today, No More Birds. Just quickly read this, okay? Ready? And start reading. Pretty cool stuff, right? What'd you think, No More Birds? Probably because the simulated human is missing. Yeah, we already said that. I already read that. How was your Neo game? He was playing a game called Neo on his stream earlier. I watched him. It was pretty cool. He was fighting some monsters. Did you kill all the monsters? That house was so infested by monsters. I was like, someone's got to get rid of all these goddamn monsters. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, no, it looked good. It didn't look like buggy or shitty or anything. There was nothing wrong with the stream. Oh, no, Mike. Yeah. Yeah, I've been thinking about if I want to stream Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, how I could do that. Yeah, I could just take I have some ideas to just like prop a laptop in front of the screen basically, and then put that in like a window, and then have well, to do it legit you need a capture card, yeah. But I was thinking of doing it not legitimately, like just having a camera in front of the screen. What do you think? Would that look like garbage? Probably. Buy a capture card. Amazon won't ship it now because of Corona, so much for that. Maybe I have to go to capturecard.com and get it. It would look like garbage? Okay. Well, maybe I will do as you say then. Yeah, they stopped shipping any non-essential things, which I'm pretty sure a Switch capture card would count as non-essential if I had to guess. But yeah, that is pretty bad. Now things are pretty bad. You wouldn't know it from how cool I am and collected and suave and everything I am. All these other good adjectives, but yeah, things are pretty bad. And they're about to get way worse. I think this week is going to be pretty like way worse than the previous weeks, and then supposedly April is going to be much worse than March, and May is going to be much worse than April. So looking good. You might be able to make a case for it. A case for for it being necessary. Yeah, sure. It's like I guess it's kind of like my job, kind of, sort of. Anyway, speaking of it's like my job, I have a Patreon, and everyone can go sign up and give me money on the Patreon to do all this stuff I do all the time. This important work of writing down these text files. And yeah. But anyway, tomorrow we're going to play, what's it called? Some community games. That should be pretty cool. And then I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about with Richard Terrell. Or I'm also not sure if I've actually... did I get that completely nailed down? Thursday, yes. Okay, yes. Richard is coming on Thursday, so that's confirmed. Yeah. So I don't know what we're going to talk about, but we will talk, and maybe we'll talk about value in games. Who knows? I was thinking, usually on the podcast when I have a guest, I come up with this whole like list of things that I want to do, and talk about and whatever. But in this one, I think we're just gonna like let's just chat and just see what are you doing, what are you playing, how's your job going, etc. etc. Got to make sure the gamers don't freak out and go on a sneezing amok streak in the streets. It's true. Although sneezing is not a common COVID-19 thing, symptom. So if you're sneezing, it could be allergies, something else. Anyways, thanks for coming by, everybody. I'll be in the chat as always, and I will see you tomorrow at the same time. And thanks for watching. Peace out.